Minahan.
Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her panel of guests bring you leading-edge astrology conversations through a journey of soul growth patterns connecting astrology's energetic cycles. Get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello! The gong strikes, and Pluto struck the chord today. It ignites the USA natal position of the forefathers that established the USA Constitution when they wrote, "We the people." So I'm Sue Rose Minahan, host of Talk Cosmos, weekly leading edge conversations, awakening the authentic self to empower soul growth. Today in Kailua Kona, Hawaii is February 20, 2022, and the Talk Cosmos subject involves an exploration of the USA Pluto return and power, addressing the promise of we the people. Power is a huge subject and relates, as we know, to both external and internal realms, but essentially it unites in its purpose and accountability. Talk Cosmos today, I'm so thrilled, brings two astounding astrologers of great insight to forge this conversation. And I'm hoping to continue, as I have not even presented it to both of them, but this is my hope, with a mini series concerning this issue of power to follow up, because there'll be new context involving July 11th and December 28th, when this gong repeats the noise, the sounds, the vibes, the energy, and it prolongs. This is not just one instance. It's been leading up, it's going over, there's talks about that. But for consensus purpose, it is today. It has already happened, as a matter of fact, I think. Yes. No, it's ahead. That's right. Because I have a little dyslexia of time zones. I'm in Hawaii, not on the mainland, but so it'll be in the next, just after the show, the exact. So to introduce these two astrologer giants, I begin and gladly welcome Samuel F. Reynolds, who pronounces himself a former skeptic, but had a life-changing visit to an astrologer, transforming his perspective, and for 30 years since does charts, studies astrology, and contributes amazingly with service on the board of directors for both the International Society for Astrological Research, which is known as ISAR, ISAR, and the International Academy of Astrology, known as IAA. Sam's the co-founder of the International Society of Black Astrologers, the ISBA, and a faculty member of the IAA. He's written multiple articles for print, not Sprint. I have Sprint, but it's print. He's sprinting. And online outlets such as Ebony, Horoscope, Tarot, and North New York Magazine. Sam's a traditional astrology consultant, teaches webinar classes through his own website, Unlock Astrology, and others. And plus, Samuel F. Reynolds is an international conference keynote speaker and lecturer. So I'm also glad to welcome my second giant astrologer, Justin Crockett-Elsey, who's an archetypal astrologer and provides an in-depth transformational astrology numerology consultations involving his focus of merging the context with the spiritual Sabian symbols, Egyptian astrology, and Vedic astrology. Justin's also a spiritualist medium in service to spirit, so to help heal relationships through communicating across the realities, which speaks to part of his life purpose. Justin does individual mediumship readings, conducts seances. Science and seance. I hope they connect in my world. And Justin does classes, tarot, interactive, intuitive webinars, such as East-West Bookshop, which will be on, connect with us on that on March 20th. It'll be quite exciting. and a host of other outlets. Justin's a member of one of the Talk Cosmos monthly panels, the Moonbeam team, where we interpret lunar phase stories for the archetypal period. So I must share that both Justin and Sam have spoken earlier about the Pluto return on Talk Cosmos. Sam was, I think it was September 26th, 2019, very early. It's a podcast. You can find it on the radio or on any podcast app or the stations, 1150 KKNW online podcast, and hear it. And then Justin was just this past December 12th concerning this ever changing conversation. So thank you, Sam and Justin. I'm so glad we're making this adventure all together. Yeah. And so, hey guys, who has the power? Who wants to venture that thought?
Let Sam go first if he wants.
Okay.
Okay.
I think where we can start is who doesn't have the power, and I'm not convinced that it's the people. I don't believe the people have the power. I think that is something that has been our hype, the thing that we talk about most as Americans, about who has the power, but I don't think that has actually congealed into consistent fact, and I think that's becoming less and less so. And there are ways in which that's happening and has been happening. And I don't know if we've always been attentive to it. I think one particular way that this happens is that, you know, America has done immensely well since World War II financially. And it's grown in ways that I don't think many current generations can fathom compared to previous generations if we study them. And so we've often traded our sense of safety, or I should say we've traded our freedom and appreciation for our freedom for a sense of safety. I am not just talking about what's happening with COVID or particular views related to that. We can go back from terrorist attacks to drugs to AIDS to any number of things that also do kind of align themselves periodically with Pluto transits, not just to America, but even toward like Saturn, Pluto transits. And we've kind of traded a lot of that. So I guess to answer the question in a roundabout way, it's not the people. I think we've come to a point where there's too much power in government and corporate entities. That's my take.
And it certainly is, as one reads about it, it is incredible. There's down in California, a university, cannot think, it's down in the Los Angeles area, very liberal, that has a whole study program about how to involve with the corporations, because it is now identified as a person. Justin, what's your addendum to all this?
I would definitely agree with Sam on this. And the thing is if you look at the chart, the Pluto is in the second house of resources and money and economics, and so that's where Pluto's at, and that's where the South Node in Aquarius is at. So from the very get-go of the establishment of the state, or the concept of the state, it's always been about people wanting a better experience or better life. So the karma around what we have to transform is around economics, and so right from the get-go in the very country, when the state was started, the people who had the power were the rich people that came over from Europe, the families. And so there was this separation of class in the very beginning, from the rich people that ran the country in the very beginning, the families, to the indentured servants, to the people that didn't have the least of power, which were the indigenous folks and the slavery. And so, the negative side of that lesson, that it's all about money and it's all about economics, is the lesson is not exploitation. And I think that's that's what this, we're having to deal with, is that the country is learning it can't exploit people or whatever else. So I totally agree with Sam. I think there's, in on paper it's like, oh yeah, even the little man has power, but really in reality it's always been about who has the money, who has the resources. And as we see in today's world, that's of course moved more into, of course, corporate, and larger people. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, the top 10 richest people in the world, 8 of them live in the United States today. So I would totally agree with Sam. I think there's this story, yeah, the little people have the power, but it's not true. It's really who's the richest and who has the money. It's all about economics.
Oh, I think
That
I'm
was
in.
cool. It was like 3 of us.
I liked it. I liked
I
it.
did like it too.
Yeah,
I was on CNN.
I was going to share and I left the studio. So sorry about this. I wanted to bring up the chart, but I think I did catch the fact that you were talking about economics. And I did realize all that. We can bring up the chart. Is that something you'd both like to do right now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here it
Just to be
is.
clear, we're bringing up the Sibley chart, which is just one chart. It's an interesting chart. Some say it's more fictional than actual fact, and various astrologers use different charts, but I like the Sibley chart. I think it works in tandem with a lot of things in American history.
Yeah, I like it because, well, it was done 12 years after the original signing of the Declaration of Independence, and Ebner Sibley was a Mason and an astrologer, and knew Ben Franklin, so he actually had, he had personal connection with the people at the time, and I think you're right, Sam. A lot of people have called it an aspirational chart because there was a lot of planning around that time.
And I brought this slide just initially. This is one that Justin actually sent to me. It's from Astro Dienst, but the point being that many times it's related at different minutes. And Pluto is such a slow moving planet with a long orbit. And that's the point of this return, 248 years approximately, as it's determined, that actually, if you went from 32.0 to 33.0, it would be a span of 14 hours. So at any rate, with a lot of sleuthing, well, the point is that it is mentioned at this particular degree. So, and this one has, let's see what the next one. And I also brought up for people, as you might be reviewing this YouTube later, that if you're not aware of what the little signatures say, here they are in English, all the names. But we might refer to them and we may not, but that's what they are on the chart. So here it is. This is the first Pluto return. But all right, can you recap just a little bit, Justin? Were you talking about, and I apologize for this because I blipped out, but that you were talking about the legality that had been declared of making corporations people, and that we are in this financial tug of war, but that it's not all about finances. That's sort of what I caught. Is that correct?
Actually, Sam brought up about the corporations there, and then of course I was mentioning about the Pluto being in the sign of Capricorn, which is an Earth sign, and in the Sibley chart is of course in the second house of resources. So, and I did mention about corporations. That's where a lot of the power is today, besides the media, because there is in the U.S. chart, there's a lot of focus also in the Gemini area, Gemini and communications area. So of course media, and of course you can see why media and the United States has a heavy hand in the world around media. But I think it was Sam that actually brought up the corporations as people, I think.
Okay. Thank you for that recap of that. And yeah, now this is a little bit logistic. Shall we go on to the actual event for today? I will do that. Here it is. This is the one for today. This is East Coast,
Yeah,
And
so you were right. It has happened already.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's right, because it's 2 o'clock East Coast. That's right. It would have been 5 hours earlier here. Thank
Mhm.
you. All right.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
Do you, do you-
go ahead.
Sue, I was going to say, do you want to go back to the main one just for a second? And
Sure.
I don't know if Sam wanted to say anything about the main natal one, but there were just a couple of things I think that when you talk about where we're at today, understanding where we're coming from, that basic natal chart, and a couple of things that I don't know if Sam wants to speak to, but I think the Sag ascendant really kind of speaks to over the that exploratory personality, and a sense of freedom, and then of course we've got that Aquarian South node, which can relate to sort of the exile, the people that branch out and sort of a humanitarian perspective, and then the Chiron, the wound of the worth. And it's interesting to note that the next the Pluto return, and so the United States is coming up on a Chiron return and that perspective. But I thought it was interesting to note also when I was talking about communications and media, and that being sort of a one of the arms of power, is the Uranus in Gemini and Mars in Gemini, the sign of communications, and how that's played out. But you see that in the original natal chart, the sun is in the seventh house. And so that's where sort of the focus is in the chart, because I think it's important to point that out, because in the return chart, it's flipped. So we got this outer focus of relationships, but then what seems to happen when you look at the December chart, then it goes inward, and there's a more of an inward turn that because it's in the first quadrant. But that was just a couple of things that I wanted to point out about the natal chart, understanding kind of the personality. I was telling somebody the other day that if the United States was a person in this chart, I would say, okay, young, competitive, um, learning to listen to one's inner voice, and interdependence of relationships and working with others. There's sort of this trying to figure out who it is, who we are as a collective, because that collective is a person, as Dane
I
Rudyard
think
talks about.
part of this disparity between what had been intended, because consciousness is really somewhat elusive, but very descriptive, or it lends the structure to how we operate. And because there's so much Cancerian, and of course we have shadow and we have the light, and the shadow side is what we can bump around and maybe forget, but at this time Pluto is everything about shadow, and we've got to get down underneath it and go, wait a minute, the tree needs some pruning, or it needs regraphing, or something like this, just on a plant terms, because it can be quite elitist with the Aquarian. If you look at that shadow, which is our moon that rules all our Cancerian energies, which involve, look at that seventh house, our sun, our perspective, our attractions, our motivations, of activity. No, activity, excuse me, is in Gemini. Thank you. So, but that means, who's my family? And, there's so many since 50s, where it's the humanity is my family, but it's not the boundaries. I think that's what Capricorn is trying to do.
Well, I think that's a good place to start in terms of understanding the United States. And I liked what you were saying, Justin, about the idea of imagining the U.S. as a person. I would add to that, if we were talking about the U.S. as a person, that this would also be a very idealistic person. An idealistic person, if we were to make like a modern analog to who this might be, this would be an analog to a hippie who becomes a yuppie, right? From the 60s to the 80s, where he's like, you know what? Yeah, I just want money, actually. I think some measure of that has always been embedded, but going back to what you were just saying, Sue, I think that has always been the struggle for this nation. When you read Common Sense by Thomas Paine, one of the things that struck me is that he really does emphasize how commonsensical it is for colonists really to accept the idea that we make this particular continent great, it should be ours. That's the real whole argument. But how he also marginalizes indigenous folks here and black folk. Like that's actually in his text, right? So I think when we were talking about the idea of family and we the people, it really didn't start off including everybody. Right? And I think that has been a lingering issue, a lingering question in America, because one thing to realize is that America is unique among nations from its time. Well, how so? Well, it's a country that, as I think we were talking about before, is composed, like I think we're talking about with New York, but I think it applies to the country, from people from all over and different places. And it's not based on using the German word folk. It's not the idea of a centralized people. And that is an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is like, okay, we don't have an idealized folk, but at the same time, we don't have like a strong, stern, clear commitment to this mismatch, this potluck, this, what do we call ourselves? The
Melting
melting
pot.
pot of a nation. So I think that's kind of like where we've struggled.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I was waiting for you, Justin, but this really touches absolutely. And I've noticed in recent weeks, preparing for this, all kinds of examples where various laws on both sides, but from my standpoint, being inclusive, which is really, I like inclusivity. I like thinking of, in other words, back to the sentence, that the laws are beginning to embrace more of this possibility, which I don't have at my fingertips. But
not to interrupt, but you would think so, but I think that kind of gets back to something that I want to point out, that I think that Sam was right on in the beginning, that we've kind of got this veneer in this country that we're free, that everybody's equal and everything else, and we think we're going in that direction. But what happened through this last presidency and this Pluto return, the mirror was shown back on us, and we're like, oh God, we're still this way. We're still we're still racist. We're still got this going on. We're still exploiting people. And I think it really kind of busted the bubble, and I think that's something that this young person, this country, has got to learn to. It can't exploit the worker. It can't exploit indigenous people or African Americans or people who are homeless, or whatever that is, or transgender. It has to be inclusive. And I think, that's exactly what we're trying to work towards. But there are still some lessons to be learned out there,
I agree, absolutely. And that really points to the fact of demolishing with Capricorn these boundaries to make community, really the Aquarian idea of community, operate. But with that takes a lot of live and let live, getting back to that Sag part, if this is the chart, to change your belief systems so that it's okay to have somebody have their ways on all kinds of things. Anyway, that's on the broad spectrum. We're in the right path for sure. Because if we could get to partnerships and collaboration through all kinds of groups, which are beginning to happen. It's not widespread, but there's like little specks, like a petri dish, beginning to happen, I guess. It seems like that it is positive. It's a growth process. But really at this point, you can't please all the people all the time. But yet, I think part of it is this acceptance, like you've been bringing up, both of you, of realizing It's not them, it's me. It's sort of like the Ho'oponopono, where you say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. In other words, embracing that in somewhere the family of life has done a discrepancy, or worse than that, to somebody else. And I will take accountability, because then, like Capricorn, you can manage it.
Yeah, I wonder if we're ready for that. I mean, it's interesting how this country was founded in terms of challenging the dominance of King George in England. And, in terms of being colonists who rebel against a power. And then how how this country then, as a colonist seeking to have power, really has been trying to find its way since that point. Like you're talking about accepting responsibility. I don't know if America really has had a general moment where it's accepted responsibility related to itself.
I love this. You're so
and when
right.
it tried to be a lot more insular, in the early 20th century, because we have to remember too, I mean, like, that's why I said things changed for this country after World War II. We were slow to get involved in World War II. Where the U.S. was slow to get involved because we were trying to be more of an insular country. We were not a superpower, right? I think one of the things that was humbling for me to learn as I kind of was like studying more American history is like there was a point in our history. It was like you're the new kid on the block and you don't know much, right? And that's how the world treated us. And then we became something else by virtue of kind of launching into the world stage, I guess, at the in the 40s, during World War II. And I bring this up just because, you touched on a very significant point of having this sense of, okay, we have to accept responsibility. I don't know if we really are ready for that. I'm not saying we shouldn't be. I don't know if we are.
I really yes, and I so appreciate this sense of conscious reality touchstone to ground us, because there's the ideal, just like that moon in Aquarius, and yet there's rock solid reality speaking. And thank you. We are at that moment where we're going to come right back. And I am with Justin Crockett, Elsie, and Samuel F. Reynolds for USA Empower Talk Cosmos. We'll be right back. And thank you. Please stay with us. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the yin period of Pisces, ruled modernly by Neptune and by Jupiter in traditional astrology of the ancients. By leaving a cycle based on the equality of all humans and brilliancy, Pisces concludes the 12 signs to energetically encompass the entirety of the universe, where humans have no control. As a mutable water sign represented by two fish swimming in opposite directions of the forces of life, we experience in Pisces the collective unconscious energy of the unknown. Intuitive, psychic Pisces completes the seed cycle, initiated with Aries' willful separation from the Piscean womb.
Talk Cosmos brings you leading-edge astrological conversations with hour-long programs each week on KKNW. The show goes live every Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific. Talk Cosmos weekly programs are also available to watch live on Facebook and YouTube, along with daily chats throughout the week on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel. While you're there, make sure you click like and subscribe buttons so you can get the full Talk Cosmos experience. Or, if you'd rather listen to the show archives with audio only, the entire podcast collection since 2018 is available on most podcast carriers. So, grab your coffee, tea, or kombucha and enjoy the show.
This is Dawn Glinsky from 6 O'Clock Astrology, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we discuss the meaningfulness of our roots in the stars.
Miss a show on KKNW? Check out 1150kknw.com for podcasts of many of our programs. That's 1150kknw.com.
Hi again, I'm Sue Rose Minahan. This is February 20, when Pluto strikes the gong, two more times happening. And I'm talking with Sam Reynolds and Justin Elsey, and about this power, about the fact that, have we ever had the power? It hasn't been inclusive. And what accountability do we have? Because I had brought up, oh, yes, the buck stops here. Well, yes, and maybe that is a good place to put it, because that moon in Aquarius can really unground a person. It's like, oh, all the thoughts and the idealism and etc. But meanwhile, back at home in your world and our own world that make up this nation, how does that get interpreted? And one of the ideas I'm thinking is it's disintegrating some of the boundaries, the restrictions that we've had to see the benefits. But that's just one thought. I'm really eager to see what you have both been thinking about that serves to spotlight some ideas.
Well, Justin,
Go ahead.
I am hungry to hear what Justin has to say.
Okay.
But I do have something that just has popped in my mind related to that. And it's actually inspired by something Justin said earlier. I mean, like, I know that the moon is in the third for the Sibley chart. But to answer your question, Sue, I think with thinking about that moon in the third house, one of the ways in terms of we have to come back to reintegration is dealing with more localized power. One of the things that I've been observing over a good number of years is how, when I say good number of years, I mean decades, how we have been relinquishing, and when I say we, individual communities, I'm not even just talking about just on the national scale or even the state scale, we've been relinquishing also individual or control related to things in our communities. Let me give you one solid example, or a few. One solid example is the Board of Education. It used to be that you had community reps within the city who, you would elect or you would select a representative from your area and serve on a board of education and have people involved in your child or the children's education in your municipality. And I thought that was powerful, and I think that is powerful. Another example, as a contrast, like with the police. Now, one of the things I've talked about a lot with the Pluto return, it's almost to the point where I'm a little sick of it myself, is I've talked a lot about the police. And one aspect of policing is that your local police in your city likely does not have to answer to you at all. It answers to a mayor and a police chief. And that police chief often may answer more exclusively to the mayor. Now, a sheriff is different. We used to have more emphasis on a county sheriff. And a sheriff we would elect, right? That comes from a municipality. That comes from people saying, like, yeah, I want that person out. We don't have that dynamic on local forms of government, and we seem to keep relinquishing it more and more. I don't know, out of fear or laziness or whatever. That's my thought. So sorry, Justin.
Good.
No. I totally agree with you, and I like where you're going with sort of identifying and naming the issue and maybe how to tackle it. And I think kind of as a lead-in back to what we left with before the break, is that I remember during this last election, people are like, oh yeah, it's all over now. And I'm like, no, there hasn't been that inflection point yet that says wake up. There's not been that inflection point. And talking about this sort of the isolationism, and really it's part of the natal chart, where the young child has to go back in and listen to the inner voice. And in the country, that's what happens. It goes through these cycles of outward expansion and then inward isolationism. And and then it has these events that happen that try to wake it up, whether it was the stock market crash, the Vietnam War, Watergate, 9/11, George Floyd. All of these are events that are trying to wake the collective up and helping it understand and ultimately accomplish what it's supposed to. But I think to where Sam's going, I think part of the solution that so the country actually fulfills its what it's supposed to as far as what the chart is saying is I think that this movement to empower economically disadvantaged populations is key because and that's getting more Hispanics and African Americans and the homeless and people um, into the economic system to where they have economic power because that's back to the natal chart, which is it's always been about who holds the wealth or who has the money, and we could see that today. Money drives the law, the politics, even the police in the country. It's who has power. And so I think economics is one of the key pillars to and empowering um, the working class economically is really the key. It has to happen, and because
And
if it doesn't, it's going to continue to be this model of the 1%, and it'll always be. It's still we still have that same model from the beginning of the United States. The rich have really the power and the wealth. It hasn't really changed.
actually, thinking of Pluto as we are working with it, and it is in the second house, and I was going to pull up the slides, but and it's in Capricorn, is yes, it does register back to that factor that can provide housing, food, the basics of community, I mean, of life, that Cancer inner outer individuality we have that we also can't ignore. That's so true. And I think what I was thinking is um, the, the, the employee, interestingly, right now, as a group, employees are, of course, they're with the big corporations. We're going to have this kind of tout and power that they're beginning to say, yeah, I'm going to somewhat like a union. In fact, I think there's more talk about unions again. I was just being told of however that goes. But that's just one level, one organizational level, because I think the other is really this networking and collaboration from grassroots people to help expand potential ideas. Like, let's say new ways of farming with hydroponics, that could maybe recycle water for mushrooms, for instance. Mushrooms are actually very good. Anyway, I'm just throwing out a little support, saying yes, it has somewhat to do with this.
And I think that taps into another element of the American psyche. And I was thinking about the Mars, and Justin, I definitely want to hear more. I don't deal with centaurs or the asteroids, so I would love to hear more what they have to say related to these things, because I know we included them in some charts. So I know that you can speak more on that than I ever could. But one other thing I was going to say about the American psychology is that we're a rugged nation. I mean, like in terms of a nation of pioneers, settlers, even as enslaved folks who were free, it's kind of making do. So we have to decide: are we fully this Cancerian taking care of each other nation, as we even stipulate, or are we this rugged individual? Well, you're on your own. Kind of take care of yourself, and maybe finding it in between, which is where we have safety nets, or even more safety nets, where we've talked about. I know Andrew Yang and different other people have been talking about guaranteed income. Dr. King was talking about, a lot of people like to quote Dr. King from 1963, but they don't seem to pay attention to the King from 1968, who also was talking about guaranteed income in 1968. And how we talk about health rights. One of the things I see as an interesting divide in America, whether you're for the vaccine or against the vaccine, is that no one's talking about the key issue, like, why don't we have better health care generally? People want to kind of point the finger at the vaccinated or the unvaccinated for what's happening with hospitals, but no one's asking, like, why don't you have enough beds? Like, what's going on? Like, it doesn't suit your business model? I mean, I think these are the things that we need to ask.
Right.
It just last night there was one about Boeings. Now I was from the Northwest where you are, Justin, and Boeings used to be, as it in this show. I mean, I wasn't watching it deliberately, but it was in my background, and they were saying, "Oh, it used to be such a great group. We all cared, and it was a big family." But then they got sold in the '90s, and it was just, we may have been making dishwashers. Who cared, because it was the price. But there is this shadow side of the greater need. I mean, it really is sometimes where we can't really be pleasing all the people all the time at all. It's really a matter of like narcissism, where you look in the in the mythology. Yeah. Looking at yourself. Well, self-confidence is one thing, but not to the extent that it denies other people just the basis of their integrity.
Well, I was going to ask you, would you mind if we could look at the December 28th, the last Pluto?
And good, because I
the
cannot
last one, because I
get
know
it
we
up
don't have a
on
lot of
my.
time, and there's something that you're both kind of speaking to that I think that there you go. So this is, as we know, this is the third pass of the year, and the one that kind of sets the tone. I think that for the next 248 years, and I think this is, if you look at it, is what I was talking about. Sort of this focus now, where it's gone from that third quadrant of the seventh, eighth, and ninth house now down to the first, second, and third house. And I think when you were talking there about, power, we're talking about power here. We now see more planets now in Capricorn with this new chart, and of course the Sun in Capricorn with the chart going forward, and Hygeia there. And so Sam talking about asteroids, it's the one that's right above the sun there. Hygeia is related to the Greek mythology, Greek and Roman goddess Hygeia. So whatever sign it's in, and for those on the call, it really speaks to the health of whatever sign it's in. It sort of has a relationship to Chiron. Of course, Maurice Fernandez talks a little bit about that also. But I find that here, that it in Capricorn, and you're talking, Sue, about how corporations are treating their employees, and with all this Capricorn in the chart going forward, it seems to be sort of this really looking inward towards one structure. I think business will continue to go on. And then because of Pluto showing up in the 12th house here, sort of a transformation of the consciousness of the collective. But there's going to be some lessons about right use of power here, because there is a more conservative bent a little bit as the nation goes forward here, because Saturn, of course, is right near the ascendant in Aquarius, which makes it more serious. But I also think this bodes well for space. I know Sam mentioned Mars really quickly there. Maybe he's talking about the planet or the actual space, but I think with that Saturn there's going to be you ask who's got the power going forward. I think there'll be a real focus on sciences, and businesses will continue to have power, but it'll be questioned. There's going to be a lot of change with power. And but with that Mars Uranus conjunction in Gemini, that's really I think it's going to that's explosive. So there's going to be a lot of disagreements, a lot of voices. We're not going to ever stop arguing with one another, but it does also bode well for the next industry, which is outer space or within the solar system. So I think there's that. but I just wanted to kind of maybe transition this chart, maybe talk a little bit about it, maybe Sue, to what you were talking about, those businesses and all of that Capricorn, and what's showing up in the chart here, and it doesn't seem to be as stable. You know, that sun is right with Eris there, which is an asteroid, which represents discord and strife and Hygeia. So there's still a lot of changes coming down the way in this country.
Yeah, in sixth house too, we're looking at the daily energies here. But you know, there's always that two sides. There's those that are disagreeing. Yes, there's going to be controversy, but yet there can also be collaboration and exchanging of
Yeah.
ideas and new ideas. And Sam, do we want to go back to the first chart also? Do we want to toggle? Let me know. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I'm actually curious about the second one, the July 11th one.
Okay, let's go.
That seems a pretty highly charged chart. I mean, I agree with Justin and what we're talking about. That's December 28th. The 11th. We were just there.
I think.
Okay. Yeah.
No. Okay. No, it's going back. I'm
right
trying.
there.
I apologize.
there.
Okay.
Right
thanks.
there. Right.
Yay.
I mean, that's a pretty
good.
charged one. Not just because it's Scorpio rising, but I think there's a lot of different things. This is a week after July 4th, you know, and one of the things to point out is that Saturn is within 3 degrees of the U.S. moon. And this is actually an exact Pluto return. When I say exact, this is a retrograde Pluto return.
Here it is. Yeah.
So the one that we just had today is direct, which, you know, it's not a big deal. It's still there, but this is exactly paralleling by a week the Sibley chart, and Pluto's retrograde. Saturn's going toward the U.S. moon. I actually think it's around this time, and Venus is actually conjoined to Mars, the U.S. Mars, and opposite to the moon to the exact degree. I think this may be like some kind of issue related to the people, where people may be in the streets for whatever reason, needing to be heard, and how we configure or relate to, you know, corporations, these other things that we're talking about, or just the involvement in government. You know, again, we kind of, one of the sad things during the Trump years is that we really got used to clowning each other, you know, and I participated in it. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say like, oh, you know, like, well, you know, those people did. I did it.
This is true. This is true.
But what I've learned, you know, since then, it's like that divisiveness just, you know, rather than the collaboration, just keeps up, rather than really learning to listen to each other, right?
And
rather than kind of going more to, it's like, oh, you're an idiot, right? I don't know if that's helpful.
And look at this, Mercury, right conjunct. It is
Right
amazing always with these, when you take either Pluto or Saturn with strong aspects, you know, with something, it's like a potpourri of other connections. So yeah, I hope we do continue on another follow-up to find out what happens. And here also,
and the midheaven is also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the midheaven is also directly opposite to the U.S. moon, to the exact degree.
Oh, so true. So true.
There's a lot that's happening on that particular day or around that time frame. I think, you know, people should pay attention. You know?
And if we look at the hearth, speaking of Vesta here, North Node right on it, along with ever-changing Uranus. And then, of course, that relates back to our attractions of the Venus. Justin?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Sam. This chart is powerful. And what jumps out to me is that moon and Sag that is within 10 degrees of the ascendant. Because, you know, I always think back to 9/11. On 9/11, Pluto was sitting on the American ascendant, Sagittarius, 12 degrees at that particular point. So I think the moon and Sag, wow, within the 10 degrees of the ascendant also says, you know, pay attention to what's happening here. That's powerful.
So the people, here we are, the people, and it's very true. We are now people are beginning to say, me, me, me. I have a voice. We just went through those nodes that were Gemini and Sag. So
Yeah.
now we have our North Node in resolute, self-sufficiency, resourceful Taurus, but we're still connecting with our Scorpio resources and what's going to work and what isn't going to work, for empowerment of us all. And so, and the spectrum has everything to do about the definitions, in a sense. Like, no longer is it just landowners, now it's whoever is a citizen. And it's also, as who's a citizen involves what is race to begin with, is like, all the definitions. What's ethnicity? What is sexuality? What is nationality? Because some people still might think, well, they're in New York, for instance, have these huge, great big communities of more people in that city than they do back home in their homeland that they came from. So it's really a merging of not a merging, but maybe a consciousness where there just has to be, speaking of this moon, somewhat live and let live. I mean, Sagittarius can be a friend.
I mean, well, are we really prepared for that? Because it's interesting. That's the thing that I was talking about during the Trump years, how divisive we were. And again, I'm not just pointing the finger at Trump.
But it was, absolutely.
But it was more so, when we say live and let live, are we really about that? Because I'll be honest, I've been a dyed-in-the-wool progressive most of my life, if not, well, all of my adult life. And it's not like I've become like a conservative now. I have not. But I have caught myself more so like, those people, blah, blah, that mentality where we're not just talking to each other as Americans, right? It's like, the world would be a better place if, I've actually had friends say, like, I think we should take all of the, the unvaccinated people, put them on an island and, let them, and I'm like, wow, have we come to this? Like, this is where we are?
Yeah,
So,
it's true.
I mean, and he's also progressive, as I understand it, that my friend who said that. So it brings up a question, like, who are we willing to let live? I think we should, but
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and to that point, I think to define what I hear Sam saying, and I totally agree with him. It comes down to values. If there was one thing, and here we were talking about the second house, I think that's one thing that came out of this pandemic is we've really started to see what people value and what are our values, and I think that's there's a lot of complexity around that about this person values this or this person doesn't. And there's certain lines, I'm progressive as well, and that I think the live and let live, it doesn't bode for some things. You really can't live and let live when it comes to racism or discrimination. Those things you can't live and let live.
That's true. No, and that is a good point. And I had not thought of that in my big picture, not little picture.
Yeah.
I was thinking really of the tolerance of just people that were living differently, but okay.
Yeah, I
So
think what we're
I
coming,
understand.
which is quite interesting. There was an article today talking about how the nation is actually getting more polarized, and it really comes down to people's values. So I think, to the point that the Pluto, again, is in that second house. It's about the structure of values of what do we value, and now we're going through the nodes that are in Taurus and Scorpio, which again relate to the second house, and resources. So again, we're
And
going
the
to see.
connection.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
And I see, unfortunately, I wish we had forever, that conjunction right now that fortunately we have for the next 5-6 weeks. We're with Mars of our actions and Venus of what we're attracted to and our values. Yes, regardless of what we say, it's really back home with ourselves, how to negotiate and how to redefine to let some of the boundaries drop. I think that's part of it, of noticing the differences, to see on a broader scale what brings us in commonality. Let's enjoy some of the Piscean energy.
All right.
Yeah. Gee, well, we don't have to quite hang up. We have a couple of seconds. I want to thank Samuel F. Reynolds so much with his website, Unlock Astrology, Justin Crockett, Elsie, Archetypal Astrology, and much more. And you can find them on the website. And this is Talk Cosmos. And right now we're living together. Let's build and make it a promise of inclusivity. Okay, so much more to say. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her panel of guests connect soul growth patterns with the energetic cycles of astrology. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time to continue your journey through the roots of the cosmic pathway.